I got a call on my smartphone saying my daughter had collapsed. I quickly caught a taxi and rushed to the hospital, but by the time I arrived, she had already passed away. Why? Tears welled up, and a deep sense of frustration, even deeper than sadness, began to swell inside me.
The doctor said it was a heart attack.
David, my son-in-law, told me in a calm voice. The 3 granddaughters who had come with him were crying their hearts out. It's no wonder they were so upset by this sudden occurrence. They're still teenagers, at such a sensitive age. I couldn't help but hold all 3 of them tightly. Then, we had my daughter's funeral. Her boss and colleagues from work attended the service, mourning her untimely death. But that night, David said something unexpected.
I'm marrying the president's daughter, so I don't need these kids anymore. You take care of them, old hag.
Incredibly, he made this outrageous declaration, openly abandoning his family. And just as he said, after the funeral, he disappeared without a trace. When I tried to contact him, his phone was disconnected. What did he plan to do with his daughters? I moved into my daughter's house to take care of my 3 granddaughters. One day, when I returned from shopping, I heard loud laughter coming from the living room. The grandkids were laughing at something. And then they quickly grabbed a piece of paper that had just come out of the printer and handed it to me.
Looks like Dad's going to hell now, huh?
My youngest granddaughter smiled sweetly as she spoke. My name is Jade. I raised my daughter, Helen, as a single mother. After losing my husband when I was in my 30s, Helen and I lived together. Through her rebellious teenage years, which now seem like a distant memory. Despite the struggles of raising her alone, I tried to give her all the love I could. When Helen got into college, she said something that touched me deeply.
Mom, I know you've worked so hard to raise me, and I want to give back and take care of you from now on.
I remember feeling a lump in my throat when she said those unexpected words. After graduating from college, Helen got a job at a prestigious company. She was always a strong child, rarely complaining about work. Though sometimes I wished she'd lean on me a little more. Once she started working, she began surprising me with trips for my birthday or Mother's Day every year. Thank you, Helen. I'm so blessed.
Me too, Mom.
We exchanged shy smiles at the hotel during one of our trips. Eventually, Helen found a partner and told me she wanted to get married. Her fiancé, David, was her colleague at the same company. He had a confident demeanor, wore expensive suits, and exuded a gentlemanly aura that left me impressed. Later, Helen told me that David had been popular among the female employees since he was a new hire. Handsome, tall, well-groomed, and an elite in the company, it was no wonder. I couldn't help but wonder what made him choose Helen.
Why did I choose Helen? Well, she's incredibly dedicated to her work, and she's also very devoted to her family. That's something I admire about her, and I couldn't help but be drawn to her.
The way they blushed and exchanged glances made me think they were a perfect match. They got married and, a few years later, had 3 children. Even after getting married, Helen and David continued to work at the same company, with David now working in the HR department. His popularity never waned, and despite having a wife and kids, female employees continued to approach him. Helen began to express her concern about how easygoing David was with everyone.
He gets all these lunch boxes from different women. He says he refuses them, though.
Don't worry, David seems like a trustworthy guy.
I hope so, but you know, some people just enjoy stealing others' partners.
I've never seen that, but is that really a thing? Nodding vigorously, Helen munched on some cookies. Since giving birth, I've noticed she's become stronger in many ways. As a wife and mother, she's grown, updating her inner self. But whenever she's troubled, I always make sure to lend an ear. As for my granddaughters, there's Emily, the eldest, and the twins, Martha and Fiona, all girls and very close. The 3 sisters have grown up well, with Emily now in her 3rd year of middle school, and Martha and Fiona in the 5th grade. Despite the age difference, they all share a love for mystery novels. Last Christmas, they asked for the complete works of Arthur Conan Doyle. I wondered if that was something for kids their age to read. But all 3 of them just laughed together and said,
"Weary mystery nerds."
Their room is apparently filled to the brim with mystery novels. I usually see my granddaughters during summer break when they come to stay with me, and they are always so attached to me.
Grandma, let's go to the movies. They're re-showing Agatha Christie's work.
And we want popcorn too.
Even if it's just for a few days, when I see their beaming faces, I can't help but want to do everything for them. All right, let's go. My daughter has warned me not to spoil them too much, but that's easier said than done. One summer, during a heat wave, I received a call on my smartphone saying Helen had collapsed. What, David, is this really true? My hands trembled, and it felt like my heart was being squeezed. But David, on the other end of the line, calmly, almost as if it were just a routine message, told me which hospital Helen was in. I quickly caught a taxi and headed to the hospital where Helen and David were. But by the time I arrived, Helen had already passed away. Tears welled up, and a deep sense of frustration, even deeper than sadness, began to swell inside me. Why? I called her name over and over, wanting her to respond. But her tightly closed eyelids never opened again.
The doctor said it was a heart attack.
The granddaughters who had come with him were crying their hearts out. It's no wonder they were so upset by this sudden event. They're still teenagers, at such a sensitive age. Of course, they would feel lost. I couldn't help but hold all 3 of them tightly. It's okay to cry, all of you. Let's say goodbye to your mom properly. As I hugged my granddaughters tightly in the hospital hallway, I looked at David.
Why, Helen? Why?
He had his back to us, probably trying not to show his tears. It looked like he was crying alone. He wiped his eyes with the cuff of his expensive suit. but for some reason, that cuff didn't seem wet. Sniffling, he turned to face us. Strangely, his eyes looked completely normal, as if he hadn't been crying at all. There were no traces of tears on his cheeks.
I'm sorry for losing control. I need to go back to the office and inform them about this.
He said this in a calm and detached manner. What? Can't you just call them? What about the girls?
Please take them home with you. Jade, I'm sorry, but I'm counting on you.
With that, he turned on his heel and left. His demeanor was so calm that it was almost scary. Or maybe he was just trying to act like it's no big deal. After that, he kept finding reasons to leave all the paperwork, including government paperwork, to me. Important business meetings, unmissable client dinners, those were his excuses. During the wake and funeral, he kept fidgeting with his smartphone.
This is from a client, and it seems one of my subordinates caused some trouble, so I need to deal with it.
But there are so many people from your company here too. Helen and David's colleagues, from superiors to subordinates, had come to pay their respects. There were bosses who shed tears over Helen's untimely death, female coworkers who had lunch with her, and younger colleagues who admired her. Everyone shared memories of Helen, saying how she was always looking out for others. They spoke of her outstanding work and how she came up with ideas that no one else could, leading to great successes. I had never heard about her work from Helen herself. Learning about this unknown side of her now filled me with a sense of inadequacy. You're the primary mourner, so you should properly greet everyone. When I gently reminded him, David sighed with annoyance.
All right, all right.
At that moment, a woman approached David.
David, my deepest condolences.
The moment she saw me, she quickly changed her tone. I found it suspicious, but David seemed unconcerned, even pleased, to see her.
Laura, thank you for coming despite your busy schedule. Oh, Jade, this is Laura Wilder.
David suddenly became very talkative and even mentioned that she was the daughter of the company's president. Watching them, I couldn't help but notice how unusually close they seemed. It seemed they weren't old friends or childhood acquaintances either. Even at the funeral, Laura wouldn't stop clinging to David. As if to say, this is my place, right by his side. My gut feeling, which I wished would stay quiet, was telling me something was off. That night, after the grandkids were asleep, I confronted David about his relationship with her. He responded with clear irritation.
What? Oh, Laura? Well, yeah, she's my girlfriend.
I couldn't believe my ears. Girlfriend?
After I get married, I realized something. Helen is plain, boring, and not at all glamorous.
I stared at him, shocked by his words.
Even though we have money, she just kept saving it all for the kids.
He spat out the words, clearly fed up.
I got tired of living like we were poor.
Saving is necessary. You have 3 kids' education to pay for.
Helen told me that too. That's why I kept telling her I wanted a divorce, over and over.
Over and over.
But she refused every time, saying it wouldn't be good for the kids. She wanted to wait until they were adults.
Maybe, as someone who grew up with a single parent, she didn't want her daughters to go through the same thing.
She always put the kids first, and I was always last. She's just too serious, and I'm sick of it.
I couldn't understand him. What kind of family doesn't prioritize their children? He was an adult, yet he seemed to only think of himself. As he fiddled with his smartphone, David said in an irritated tone,
That's why I started dating Laura, to blow off some steam, and then I realized I'd be better off without Helen.
I was speechless, unable to say anything, but he continued without a hint of shame.
Well, it's perfect timing. I'm marrying the president's daughter, so I don't need these kids anymore. You take care of them, old hag.
Incredibly, he openly declared his intention to abandon his family. Before I could say anything, he was already gone. Even though he attended the funeral as the primary mourner, as soon as it was over, he left the house, leaving the grandkids in a panic. When I tried to contact him, he wouldn't answer the phone. I also heard from the company that after his bereavement leave, he switched to paid leave and hasn't shown up for work. Helen never mentioned anything to me about wanting a divorce. It was a private matter between them, so maybe it wasn't my place to interfere, but I couldn't help feeling that I might have been able to offer some advice. I can't let myself get sentimental now. I slapped my cheeks with both hands and packed for a few days. I decided to stay with my grandkids for a while. When they saw me, they were relieved and started crying, making quite a commotion. With their father gone too, they must have felt completely lost. It's okay now, I'm here with you. After calming them down with a tight hug, I set about preparing dinner and taking care of the laundry. I glanced at the calendar and noticed a date circled in red with the words "Summer break starts" written on it. It seemed to be starting next week.
Grandma, this year you came to our house instead.
I looked down to see Martha clinging tightly to my waist. Her eyes were red from crying earlier. With her innocent expression, she stared at me for a moment before darting out of the living room. Emily and Fiona didn't say anything, but it was clear they were also trying to cope with the reality of the situation. As I spent time with them, I started sorting through Helen's belongings. Each item I picked up brought back a flood of memories. Why did my daughter, whom I had raised on my own with so much effort, have to leave this world so soon? Life is unfair. As these thoughts ran through my mind, I picked up a diary. Upon closer inspection, I saw it had a combination lock, unlike the other things. Come to think of it, she mentioned something about this a few months ago. Helen had told me, if anything ever happens to me, I want you to look at the diary with the lock. She had even given me the combination, saying it was for my ears only. The combination was the sum of the birthdays of Helen, David, Emily, Martha, Fiona, and myself. The dial had 4 digits, with the left 2 representing the month and the right 2 the day. 2788, it's open. What could be written inside? Could it be a will? Part of me didn't want to look, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I slowly turned the pages.
If you're reading this, it means I've already left this world.
These words at the beginning startled me. I must be reading too many novels. Shaking off the initial shock, I continued reading, only to find something that made me doubt my eyes. This can't be true. The diary detailed Helen's suspicions about David's infidelity and the steps she took to gather evidence. It also mentioned the harsh working conditions at her job. There were records of unreported overtime and evidence to back it up. Even when she reported feeling unwell, she was denied permission to go to the hospital and was even brushed off at times. She had hidden recordings of these instances in another place. When I found and listened to the recordings, I decided to listen to it right away. There I heard a harsh voice berating Helen after she asked to go to the hospital. I couldn't understand why she was treated so harshly. It seemed David was the one who had arranged for her transfer to this strict boss.
My husband betrayed me and our children. He will pay for this.
The diary ended with this declaration. Helen had been preparing to demand compensation from David and his mistress, and to proceed with a divorce. I was astonished at how resourceful my daughter had been. But now that I had found these things, Helen was no longer here. The diary and the recordings felt useless, and I threw them aside. The three sisters continued attending school, trying to be strong. I hoped they weren't pushing themselves too hard. I did everything I could to support them, keeping a close eye on them. A week passed, and my grandkids are on summer break. In the garden, 2 potted sunflowers they had brought home from school stood tall, almost ready to bloom. After the break began, the girls started spending a lot of time in David's room. I suppose, as children, they couldn't let go of the idea of him being their father. Knowing what he had done made my heart ache. Even as I sorted through Helen's belongings, I would bring snacks to the sisters. I've brought some orange juice for all of you. They were looking through David's books and scrapbooks, almost like they were searching for treasure. At other times, they would fiddle with the family computer and tablet, arguing about this or that. I figured it must be for some summer project, so I didn't pry. Then one day, as I returned from shopping, I heard loud laughter coming from the living room. The grandkids were laughing hysterically at something. Well, what's so funny, girls? You seem to be having a great time. As I approached, Fiona noticed me and gave a big smile. She quickly grabbed a sheet of paper that had just come out of the printer and handed it to me.
Now Dad's going to hell, right?
Puzzled, I looked at the paper they handed me. Printed on it was the title of an anonymous forum thread, "Gather here if you want your wife to die." What is this? I could tell it was from an anonymous message board, but being unfamiliar with computers, I couldn't understand what it meant. With a questioning look on my face, Emily explained,
Grandma, do you see the red username here? It says Dave.
Dave.
Yes. Comments posted from the internet connection here show up in red. So this one was written by Dad.
Sure enough, The comments by Dave were highlighted in red. As I read on, I saw detailed descriptions of how he had driven Helen to her breaking point.
I abused my HR authority and transferred my wife to a problematic department. They're always short-staffed, so it serves her right. She's so helpful that she stays late every day to help her team, easily exceeding 80 hours of overtime each month. It won't be long before she collapses from exhaustion.
How could he? I was horrified, but the comments continued.
I pretend to be concerned about my tired wife, but I make her unhealthy meals loaded with oil and salt. It's hilarious watching read it every day. She told me her health check results were bad, but I won't let her go to the hospital or get a follow-up.
These malicious words were written in red. Other users on the forum responded to David's posts with comments like "you monster" and "keep it up." How could someone who isn't even the Grim Reaper meticulously plan to drive another person to their breaking point like this? I couldn't hide my shock at how far David had gone, especially given how pleasant he always seemed. His final post read,
My wife is finally dead. She was taken to the hospital for a heart attack, and I met my mother-in-law there. I pretended to be sad. Now I'm free from her.
How awful. He had reported Helen's death with joy. It was so horrifying that I could barely believe it. In the other comments, people congratulated him, expressed envy, and even praised him. I never imagined such a vile world existed, and the realization made me weak in the knees. David was as cunning and depraved as a snake. How could this be allowed to happen? Anger began to well up inside me. But what surprised me most was that the girls had noticed David's behavior.
It's elementary, my dear Watson,
Martha said, imitating Sherlock Holmes.
Even though they worked at the same company, Mom was always so busy, while Dad seemed so relaxed. It felt off.
And Fiona added,
Whenever we argued with Dad, he used to say something.
What did he say?
He said, "Don't rely on your mom, she might not be around much longer."
If they argued, it seems David didn't have a great relationship with the girls. They must have been suspicious of their father's actions for a long time. Since then, the three sisters had been keeping a close eye on David. He frequently used the computer, and, even though he had no interest in cooking, would look up recipes and watch cooking videos. They also found search terms like unhealthy meals and sodium content in the tablet's search history. And they knew about the mysterious woman in the photos on his tablet. They'd even seen him slightly smile after Helen's death and during the funeral. But the most damning evidence was the scrapbook he left behind.
It was filled with articles about people who collapsed from overwork. Some of them were diagnosed with heart attacks.
So, we decided that Dad was probably the culprit.
We've been gathering evidence since summer break started.
I see, these mystery-loving sisters had sharper observation skills than either David or I had imagined. But how did you manage to find this forum? I asked, and Martha grinned proudly.
We used the tablet's search history, and I read a book about how to recover deleted history, Watson.
Could a fifth grader really do such a thing? But if they hadn't, we wouldn't have had this printout in our hands. I thought about how lonely and scared these young teenagers must have felt after losing their mother. I recalled their relieved and tearful faces when I arrived at their house. I couldn't ignore how hard they had been trying to fight in their own way. My eyes welled up, and tears began to fall.
Grandma?
What's wrong?
I couldn't let the efforts of these little detectives go to waste. I bit my lip, looked at the three of them, and thought of Helen. He will pay for what he's done. There's no way I'll let David get away with this. I swore that he would face the consequences of his actions as a father. Thank you, all of you. Now leave the rest to me. A few days later, I visited a lawyer I knew. I showed him the evidence the girls had found and asked if it was enough to file for damages. As he looked over the printed forum posts and search history, his face clouded with doubt, saying it might not be enough. Then, could we use this as well? I presented the diary and the recordings that I had found among Helen's belongings.
Let me take a look.
He flipped through the diary and listened to the recordings. He then said that with the diary added, we had a strong case and could demand significant damages. We might also be able to secure child support. Afterward, I sent copies of the recordings and the diary's contents to Helen's company. I addressed them to her former boss, who had attended the funeral and had shed tears, asking him to conduct an internal investigation. He acted quickly, reviewing the recordings and diary and sharing them with the executives. David's misuse of his HR authority to drive his wife, a talented employee, to her breaking point became known to the executives. They were furious and summoned David. The investigation continued, confirming the facts and gathering testimony from other employees, ultimately leading to David's dismissal. Considering his actions, it was well-deserved. Later, I happened to run into him on the street, but he was unrecognizable. His once well-groomed appearance was gone. His beard was overgrown, and his once fine suit was wrinkled.
Jade, you ruined my life.
I frowned, wondering what he was talking about. After all, I had lost my beloved daughter. It turned out that his mistress, Laura, had dumped him shortly after he was forced to resign.
You're still going to follow me even though I'm like this, right?
When he asked her if she'd still stay with him, she coldly replied,
What? I can't be with an unemployed old man.
They had been living together, but she ended that too, and now he was living alone in a run-down apartment.
You bled me dry with the damages in child support. I'm broke.
He complained about how his savings were nearly depleted after keeping up with the lavish lifestyle of his former lover. I felt more anger than sadness. I wanted to chase after him and slap that face of his. But the fact that he didn't even ask about the girls showed that he no longer had any love left for his family. With that thought, I resigned myself to the fact that nothing I did would get through to him. Instead of wasting energy hating him, I found much more happiness in focusing on raising my 3 granddaughters. By the way, after David resigned, several executives from the company visited our home. They came to apologize for what happened to Helen. They regretted not being aware of her situation, which ultimately led to her death. They offered a large sum of compensation from the company and asked me to accept it. I was surprised by the sudden offer, but I decided to accept it. However, even with that money, my daughter would never come back. I would never be able to laugh with her again. As I thought about this, I watered the sunflowers in the garden. The large flowers stood tall, blooming beautifully. Thanks to the damages, child support, and compensation, as well as the savings Helen left behind, I was able to raise my granddaughters without any financial worries. Emily started attending a prep school as she prepared for her high school entrance exams. Martha and Fiona began enjoying mystery novels, dramas, and comics, making their days seem full and happy. Still, sometimes I'd see them looking around as if searching for their mother, and it would make my heart ache. Losing my daughter and the girls losing their mother is a sadness we all share. I hope that, as we slowly heal from this pain and loneliness, the four of us can truly smile again. Like those sunflowers, I wish for us to keep our heads held high and live life with strength.
Still unable to find the right words, I gently embraced my granddaughter, Wendy. "I'm sorry, your mom is." I told her in a trembling voice that your mom had gone a long way. It was a reality too harsh for a 10-year-old girl. No matter her reaction, I was prepared to support her. When Wendy learned what had happened to her mom, she suddenly smashed the photo frame in the living room. The acrylic frame contained a family picture of Wendy, my daughter, her husband, and me. There are 4 of us. It was only secured at the corners, so even a small effort from her was enough to shatter it. Silently, the photo alone fell to the floor. I couldn't understand her actions and raised my voice without thinking. "Stop it. That's a precious memory from our family trip, isn't it?"
But, Grandma, Mom told me to look at the back of this.
Unperturbed, Wendy picked up the fallen photo. She was an innocent, smiling girl, but sometimes her words seemed surprisingly mature. Perhaps my daughter Emily's spirit appeared here and told Wendy to do this.
No, she said if something happened to her, to look at the back of this photo.
Wendy handed me the photo with a bright smile. I looked at the picture, not knowing what it was about. My name is Anne. Until recently, I was the president of a clothing brand. When I thought back to a few months ago during Saturday lunchtime at my usual diner, it was a chilly, rainy day in early spring. I'm thinking of retiring from the president. On my 67th birthday, Emily had strongly opposed it. I had always been there to advise her, and I was proud to be her understanding confidant. And I believed she was mine, so her reaction surprised me. Emily, a new era and trends are created by the new generation.
But, Mom, you still.
I want to leave my company in your hands. It will get even better that way, I assured her with a confident gaze. I knew she had the knack for spotting trends.
All right, Mom, it's your cherished company. I'll make sure it grows even bigger.
Her enthusiastic demeanor reminded me of my husband, who had passed away early. When the company was just starting, he was full of determination. "I will definitely make you happy." Then, right after Emily was born and I was savoring our happiness, he died in an accident. The loss came so suddenly I couldn't even feel sad, just blamed myself. But then, there was Emily. I had to protect and raise her, which spurred me on. Without Emily, I wouldn't have made it this far. Raising a daughter on my own while managing a business, I lived my life to the fullest. I was relieved I could get her through college. Her once dependable small back was now slightly taller and more reliable than mine. Now Emily is dedicatedly pushing our company forward every day. She still consults me about anything uncertain or troubling her. Today, she called me for lunch to discuss her concerns about our relationship with a rival company.
Mom, sorry to keep you waiting. Have you ordered yet?
I'm just deciding now. As we both looked over the menu, we finished ordering through the touchscreen installed at the table. Then, Emily's expression sharpened as she switched to her business demeanor.
So, you see, Nancy is.
Nancy was Emily's classmate and the president of a rival company. They met in college and remained in touch even after graduating and getting married. I had met her several times, a person who appeared serene yet possessed a remarkable sense of creativity. Nancy has also started her own company, and she's a good rival, competing in performance with Emily. Lately, though, there's something off about Nancy.
She's suddenly become distant.
Don't you know why?
Not really. I've even been blocked on social media, wondering what to do.
While munching on her specialty fried chicken with plenty of tartar sauce.
What do you think?
She stuffed her mouth full as she spoke. We've had these kinds of conversations before. But neither Emily nor I expected that she would become bitter enemies with her childhood friend. It would be best if they could meet and talk, but that seems difficult.
And there's a bit about David too.
Emily added with a troubled look. David is her husband and also the vice president.
Lately, he's been making a lot of mistakes at work, and I have to cover for him.
Really?
Totally. He forgets his documents at meetings with clients, shows up late to meetings with bed hair.
The stories of David's blunders continued, and it was stressful for Emily.
I'm grateful to you, Mom. You raised me while running the company, and I really respect that.
But Emily continued, looking down.
That's why I want to run your company properly, but I hate that he's messing it up.
After finishing our meal, we stepped outside. Basking in the early summer sun, I smiled and said, "He's trying his best. Remember, failure is the stepping stone to success. It'll get better." Emily puffed her cheeks, seemingly unconvinced. About 2 weeks after our lunch, we had a family dinner. Our family has a tradition of dining together once a month on the third Saturday. I always looked forward to these dinners more than anything. Since my husband passed away, I had become distant from my relatives, and I didn't have many friends nearby. Having retired from the presidency, I hardly talked to people anymore, so these occasions were especially important. I left home eagerly, arriving at the venue 30 minutes early. The place was a slightly upscale Taiwanese restaurant, renowned as a hidden gem in reviews. Seeing my overly excited self, the staff couldn't help but chuckle. Oh my God. I was guided to a table marked reserved, where I waited for Emily and her family. Glancing outside the window, I noticed someone briskly walking under the street trees. It was Nancy. I leaned forward impulsively, but could only follow Nancy with my eyes through the glass. Since hearing from Emily, I had been somewhat worried. Nothing could be inferred from Nancy's brisk walking, but I wondered what she thought about Emily. As fellow business owners, shouldn't they have things in common? I had few friends in similar positions, but I rarely had fallouts with them. Therefore, it was hard for me to empathize with Nancy's feelings or Emily's. While I was thinking, Emily's family arrived, looking surprised.
Mom, you're quite early.
I guess I got the time wrong. I laughed awkwardly and urged them to their seats. Emily, her husband David, and their daughter Wendy each took their seats. Wendy is turning 10 this year. Her innocent smile is striking, but sometimes she acts surprisingly mature. We opened the menu and each picked our favorite dishes and sides to order.
Grandma, I don't have a single cavity.
Wendy announced proudly, showing off her neatly aligned teeth with a smile. Really? That's because you've been brushing well, haven't you?
Yes. I brush my teeth morning and night.
Wendy boasted, puffing out her chest. It was endearing to watch her, and it warmed my heart.
Dad has cavities though, 6 of them.
She glanced at David and giggled.
Hey, don't tease adults too much.
David smiled along though. I had heard he'd been making some mistakes at work and wondered if he might be feeling down. But he seemed cheerful throughout. And there was no sign of trouble between him and Emily. They were chatting happily.
Dad, you should brush properly too.
I do. I even use an electric toothbrush.
Their light-hearted banter brought smiles to all three, making it a joyful family moment. Maybe Emily's concerns weren't as serious as I thought. Soon after, our food arrived. The table was set with dishes for 4, along with various other dishes. Eat up, everyone.
Mom, we can't possibly eat all this.
It's fine. Right, Wendy, you're not picky.
I don't like bell peppers. Does this have bell peppers in it?
Wendy peered suspiciously as David laughed.
If there are, I'll eat them.
But you don't like bell peppers either. I know.
Called out by his daughter, David and Emily both burst into laughter, revealing a side of him I hadn't seen.
No, that's not true.
David chuckled sheepishly and began eating his noodle. Amid the cheerful atmosphere, I glanced around the restaurant. Perhaps because it was lunchtime, the place was bustling with customers. Staff were busy setting tables and guiding diners. In the kitchen, pans were sizzling as dish after dish was prepared. A hefty chef who seemed to be in charge shouted, "Table 7, Xiao Long Bao." A waitress swiftly carried the dish out, eager to serve it hot. It's a nice place. The food is delicious. I sipped some dim sum soup and commented.
Yes, and the atmosphere is great. But still, I think my wife's cooking is the best.
Stop it. What are you saying?
Emily laughed, a bit embarrassed but clearly pleased. It was a heartwarming moment until Wendy spoke up.
Liar.
What? In an instant, the adults froze. The bustle of the restaurant seemed to fade away, and an eerie silence fell over us. The 3 adults stared at Wendy. Wendy, what did you just say? While forcing a smile, I asked Wendy.
I said Dad was a liar because Dad always leaves Mom's cooking.
No, that's not it. It's because I snack too much before dinner.
Wendy looked at me skeptically as I awkwardly tried to explain. But her expression quickly changed back to one of innocence, and she burst into laughter.
Really? Dad, that's not good.
That's right. Wendy's been patient.
From now on, no snacks for Dad.
Oh, come on. That's not fair.
Laughter filled the air, and the three of us were smiling again. Before we knew it, the sounds around us became audible again, and the lively atmosphere seemed to return. After dessert, which was almond jelly, we ended our meal without incident. As we were leaving, I lingered a bit to say goodbye to Emily's family.
Grandma, thanks for the dinner today. Bye-bye.
See you, Wendy. She waved her little hand vigorously and ran off in the opposite direction I was going. What was with Wendy I saw today? Both Emily and David just laughed it off, saying, "She's always like that," which also worried me.
Mom, see you next month.
We'll treat you next time.
With those words, the two disappeared into the crowd with Wendy. It was a fun and enjoyable meal as usual, and I felt the usual pang of sadness at parting. But something nagging at me felt like a splinter had formed. Although Emily and I said, "See you next month," it was unexpectedly betrayed. Just a few days after our meal, Emily was in a car accident. I rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. She was only 38. I can't believe it. Why? Emily lay on the hospital bed, her eyes firmly closed. David had come out to the hallway soon after arriving, and I could hear his sobs, which were not my imagination. Both David and I were engulfed in grief and could not speak for a while. David, who regained his composure first, came up to me with a tear-streaked face.
I'm sorry. I have a meeting soon. Could you pick up Wendy for me?
Oh, you have a meeting.
And I think I'll be busy and away from home for a while, so I'd like you to take care of Wendy.
I simply replied, "Okay," and watched David leave. The suddenness of it all left me in a daze. Unlike David, I wasn't strong enough to act immediately after losing a loved one. The days I spent with my daughter flashed through my mind in an instant, almost missing Wendy in them. Wendy should be getting out of school about now, and she doesn't know about this yet. How should I tell her about her mom's death? I headed to Emily's house. Using the spare key from the mailbox to enter, I started preparing to take care of Wendy. Soon after, Wendy came home.
Grandma.
She must have sensed something from seeing me. Dropping her pastel-colored backpack in the living room, she came closer. The innocent smile that was so characteristic was gone, and she looked at me curiously. Still unable to find the right words, I gently embraced Wendy. "Wendy, I'm sorry. Your mom, well." I told her in a trembling voice that your mom had gone a long way. It was a reality too harsh for a 10-year-old girl. No matter her reaction, I was ready to support her. However, Wendy slipped out of my arms and picked up a photo frame displayed in the living room. The acrylic frame contained a family picture of Wendy, my daughter, her husband, and me. There are 4 of us. Wendy? Just as I thought she was staring intently, suddenly Wendy broke the frame. The frame, held together only at the corners, easily came apart with a little force from her young hands. Just like that, the photo fell to the floor. Unable to understand her actions, I inadvertently raised my voice. "Stop it. That's a precious memory of our family trip, isn't it?"
But, Grandma, Mom told me to look at the back of this.
Wendy, undisturbed, picked up the fallen photo. Could it be that Emily's spirit appeared here and told Wendy to do this?
No, she said if something happened to her, to look at the back of this photo.
Wendy handed me the photo with a bright smile. I looked at it, puzzled, and turned it over. On the back, in Emily's handwriting, it read, "I am being targeted by my husband." The hurried writing seemed to convey an urgent message. Targeted by her husband, David. What did that mean? I had never heard such a thing from Emily. Could it be that only Wendy and Emily knew about this? Could this message be related to Emily's death? Could David have? He hadn't shown any signs, and he had been at the hospital with me, mourning Emily's death. My thoughts were swirling, becoming more confused. Then David returned, muttering to himself.
Damn, I forgot my documents here.
Seizing the opportunity, I confronted David. "David, we need to talk. Come here, please."
No, I have a meeting.
David seemed to be avoiding the conversation, as if he was hiding something or knew something he didn't want to be known. I quickly blocked his path with the message on the back of the photo. "What is this?" David glanced at it and muttered, "Damn," under his breath before looking away. I pressed him further. "Answer me. This is Emily's handwriting."
I don't know anything about it. My wife has just died, and you bring up this distasteful prank?
Emily told Wendy to look at this if something happened to her. Why don't you know?
Emily?
David was clearly agitated, his eyes darting around as he began to sweat. No matter what I asked, David kept denying any knowledge. Then Wendy quietly added,
"It makes sense that Dad wouldn't know. Mom and Dad never talked about anything at home.
Wendy, stop it.
Mom said it was pointless to talk to Dad. He never listened to her anyway."
But when we met last time, you two seemed to be getting along well."
"That was just trying not to worry you, Grandma."
"That's why they pretended to get along."
Wendy, stop talking nonsense.
"It's the truth. Dad's the liar."
Who are you calling a liar?
David, enraged, raised his fist. I thought he was going to hit Wendy, so I instinctively jumped on him. "Stop! Don't you dare touch Wendy!"
Let go.
He swung his raised fist down on my back. Ouch!
"Grandma."
I fell to the floor with a dull thud. Wendy came over and looked into my face, her eyes brimming with tears. If things continued this way, both of us might end up being hit by David. He was mumbling something, his face red and his shoulders shaking.
It's all her fault. Everything.
I didn't know whom he was blaming. I managed to get up and urged Wendy to go outside.
"No. I'm not leaving without you, Grandma."
Tears finally spilled from Wendy's eyes. She clung to me crying, while David continued to mutter to himself. Holding my aching back, I crawled toward the entrance. Noticing this, David shouted, "You're not getting away," as he picked up a pair of scissors and started to chase us. We were just a few steps from the door, but it wasn't enough. "Help!" I shouted as I shielded Wendy. That was when it happened. The door suddenly opened and someone burst in.
No.
With a mighty yell, Nancy appeared. Using her business bag as a shield, she charged at David and pushed him back. David stumbled and fell to the floor. Nancy then pinned his arm behind his back and held him down on the floor.
"Give it up. I've called the police. What have you done to them?"
Ouch! Who the hell are you?
Taken aback by the unexpected arrival, both Wendy and I were shocked. "Nancy, why are you here?"
"Oh, Anne, long time no see. Emily asked me to look after you too."
Nancy explained that she had made a promise to Emily. It was when Nancy's company was struggling, and she had consulted Emily about management strategies. Following Emily's advice had gradually improved her business. In gratitude, Nancy had told Emily to call on her if she ever needed help.
Well then, if something happens to me, please take care of Wendy and my mom.
Although Nancy didn't fully understand at the time, she had always kept that promise in mind.
I knew Emily had a way of foreseeing things, so I believed that something might happen eventually, though I hoped it wouldn't.
Nancy chuckled wryly.
That's why I started investigating what was going on around Emily.
As the investigation by a private detective progressed, concerns about David began to arise. Initially, since he was Emily's husband, it wasn't unusual to think he might be involved in some related matters. But then, it became clear that there was something abnormally wrong. "What do you mean?"
You must be aware that he had Emily cover for his mistakes at work.
Of course, I knew that. But what does that have to do with this? David groaned in frustration and exclaimed, "It's all her fault."
Emily was always helping me, meddling unnecessarily. It was annoying.
Annoying? You felt that way?
My self-esteem was damaged. I am the vice president, after all.
Unbelievably, David harbored resentment towards Emily.
And from that resentment, he had been planning to take over the company.
Exposed, David started ranting nonsensically. Nancy firmly restrained him. David continued to rave.
Today's car accident was a coincidence. I thought it was lucky. I saw it as a chance to take over the company.
How can that be? You were crying in the hospital. I clearly heard David sobbing. Was that also his act?
Acting? No, those were tears of joy.
Far from mourning Emily's death, he was internally delighted at the opportunity to take over the company and cried tears for that reason. David's nature was utterly twisted. I was too shocked to speak, but Wendy clearly stated,
"He's the worst. He's not my dad."
Just then, the sound of a police car arriving could be heard. Through the open front door, a robust police officer entered, followed by a slender middle-aged officer for support. David was subdued by the robust officer and dragged away. Beside that, we explained the situation to the middle-aged officer. By the way, Nancy, that was quite the charge.
Well, I did karate as a kid.
Shortly after, the police officer cautioned her, "Please avoid dangerous actions." Wendy and I ended up living together. Emily's funeral received condolence messages from business associates and her friends, and Nancy also attended the ceremony. I truly felt it was good that we could send off my daughter together. After the interrogation by the police, I saw David again a few days later, and he looked haggard. A large bruise had formed on my back where he had hit me. On Nancy's advice, I went to the hospital, got a medical report, and submitted it where necessary. Whether it was because of that or not, David was eventually convicted of assault. I imagine he's in prison now. I decided to legally adopt Wendy and raise her myself. With everything that happened, I felt drained of both physical and mental energy. But I can't afford to fall apart for Wendy's sake. I must protect this child left by Emily. I'll try to hang in there a little longer. I whispered to myself as I watched Wendy's sleeping face. After the funeral, Nancy invited me for tea, and we went to a chic cafe near the station. There, Nancy confessed that she hadn't genuinely disliked Emily.
Embarrassing to admit, but I was jealous of Emily.
Jealous? Why?
I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I could never beat Emily.
Nancy confessed after discussing business strategies, which confirmed her feelings.
I was jealous and frustrated, and I ended up blocking her on social media to distance myself.
She continued, taking a sip of her latte before adding,
But really, deep down I respected Emily.
Nancy said this with a hint of sadness. Perhaps somewhere in her heart, she regretted blocking Emily on social media.
If I had known it would come to this, I honestly wish I had reconciled with her.
For Nancy, Emily was a rival but also someone worthy of respect. Nancy, thank you for being a friend to Emily, I said, to which Nancy smiled shyly. Then, the conversation shifted to what would happen with my company. With both the president and the vice president gone, rebuilding the company would be difficult. I was temporarily managing some parts, but I couldn't continue for long. I was considering transferring ownership and letting go of the company.
Please let me do it.
Nancy suddenly offered it, and I almost spit out my coffee in surprise. I hadn't expected Nancy to say that. But it's going to be tough.
I fully understand the difficulties, but I want to protect the company that Emily and you cherished. Please let me.
Nancy earnestly begged for it. I hesitated, but was moved by her enthusiasm and felt that I could entrust her with it. All right, I'll proceed with that in the board meeting.
Thank you so much.
This marked the beginning of Nancy and I growing closer. In the months that followed, we often dined together, and I came to think of her like a daughter. Meanwhile, Wendy, though separated from her parents, didn't seem much bothered about her father. She had somewhat come to terms with her mother's death over these months. Honestly, I still couldn't believe Emily was gone, but I decided to live looking forward. Lately, Nancy also comes to visit, paying respects to Emily's portrait. Wendy and she have grown closer, and their outings together have increased. Today, we enjoyed a girls' day out at the diner where Emily and I used to have lunch.
Nancy, guess what? I don't have a single cavity.
Wendy proudly boasted. I couldn't help but hope for such peaceful days to continue.
I'm leaving this houses today.
Leaving your kids behind like that, you're the worst wife ever.
My mother-in-law, Susan, scolded me right up until the moment I said my farewell.
Buff.
Seeing the kids burst out laughing, Susan probably thought they were on her side.
Even your own kids are laughing at you. How sad.
She looked at me with a smug grin. It's actually her who's pitiful. At that moment, Susan had no idea what was about to happen in the future. My name is Olivia, and I'm a 45-year-old stay-at-home mom. I live with my husband, Kevin, my daughter, Samantha, and my son, Sean. My kids were busy with their school clubs and part-time jobs, and Kevin worked late every night. As for me, I spent my days looking after the family as a stay-at-home mom, leading a busy but fulfilling life. That was until today. One day, my husband suddenly decided that his mom was going to move in with us. I knew Susan had been living alone in her old house since my father-in-law passed away. Kevin had always said he was worried about her, so that part didn't surprise me. But if we were going to live together, we should have talked about it as a family first. Why did you decide something so important like having your mom move in without consulting us? Shouldn't we have discussed it as a family ahead of time?
Just shut up. It's already decided. I can't just leave my mom alone at her old place.
Kevin never cared about my opinion from the start. He and his mom had already made her arrangements, and her house was sold without me having any say in it. They decided the moving date between the two of them, leaving me no room to intervene. And that was the start of my nightmare living with Susan.
Hey, Olivia, are you even cleaning every day? The place is pretty dusty, you know.
I'm sorry, I couldn't keep up this week. I've been really busy and couldn't get to every corner.
Excuses, really? You're a stay-at-home mom. There's no excuse for slacking off on housework.
Susan would catch even the slightest lapse in my housework and nag at me endlessly. I could never relax in my own home.
Must be nice being a stay-at-home mom, huh? You get to lounge around all day. You better be grateful to Kevin for bringing in the money.
Lounge around? Not at all. Ever since she moved in, I've barely had a moment's rest. I've been running around like crazy. The one lounging around is her. I know she never liked me from the start. Still, now that we were living together, wouldn't it be possible for her to compromise a little, even if she didn't like some things? I was at my wit's end with Susan's constant jabs, so I decided to talk to Kevin. Kevin, I need you to say something to Susan. She's been saying all sorts of things to me every day, and it's really taking a toll on me.
There's no way Mom could be wrong about anything. You've probably just been slacking off anyway, right? You should be grateful that she's training you to be a proper housewife.
Kevin always had a bit of a mama's boy streak, but it got even worse once we started living with his mom. To him, whatever his mom said was always right. It was useless to talk to him about it. After that, Susan continued to leave all the housework to me, and if she didn't like something, she'd endlessly nag about it. If I tried to argue even a little, she'd make up stories and tell Kevin. During the day, I had to deal with her snide remarks, and at night, I got complaints from Kevin, who took her words at face value. I was completely exhausted. Still, I endured it because I was a stay-at-home mom. Before I got pregnant, I had worked full-time. But when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't feel confident I could balance work and childcare, so I quit my jobs. Since then, we've been living on Kevin's income alone, so I felt I had to endure everything, no matter how hard it got, for financial reasons. However, as the stress piled up day after day, I started to worry that I'd lose my sanity if this continued. If that's the case, maybe it would be better to just get my job. With that thought in mind, I began looking for work. I made sure to complete the housework perfectly so Susan wouldn't have anything to complain about. And in my free time, I started job hunting. It must have bothered her that she couldn't criticize my housework anymore. Now, she began to pick on me about my job search.
Oh my, out again today? What kind of housewife leaves the houses all the time, putting on makeup like that? Are you out looking for men or something?
That's just nonsense. I'm looking for a job so I can save money for the kids' future. So please stop making weird accusations.
Oh really? A real housewife would manage her husband's income wisely and save money that way. Honestly, Olivia, you're just a useless wife who can't handle finances properly.
She made it seem in front of my kids as if I were some kind of promiscuous mother. I've managed to deal with everything Susan threw at me, but even I had my limits. That night, I suggested we have a conversation with the three of us, me, Kevin, and Susan. During that conversation, I told Kevin that I had started looking for my job. I also expressed how hurtful it was that every time I went out, Susan accused me of looking for men. I hoped that, even though Kevin was a mama's boy, he would at least put his mom in her place. However, instead of scolding her, Kevin said something completely outrageous to me.
Mom has every reason to be suspicious. Frankly, I can't trust anything you say. If you really do start working, you're going to give 70% of your salary to Mom.
What? 70%? I couldn't believe my ears. Kevin didn't trust me at all. On top of that, demanding that I give 70% of my paycheck to his mom was absurd. When I tried to argue, Susan jumped in immediately.
You can do that, can't you? You need to prove to the kids that you're not out looking for men.
She said this with a smirk, looking straight at me. At that moment, I was absolutely furious with her, but I somehow managed to control myself and think rationally. If I argued now, Kevin wouldn't listen to me anyway. Even if most of my paycheck would be taken by Susan, it was still better to work outside than to stay home with her all day. The conversation between the three of us ended with me just listening to what Kevin and Susan had to say. I didn't even care anymore. Being with Susan was unbearable for me. A few days later, I started working part-time at a construction company. I couldn't work long hours since I had to make sure the housework was done perfectly, or else I'd never hear the end of it from Susan. Fortunately, there was a vacancy for an office position at a construction company relatively close to home, and I got the job. Working again after so long was tough, but it was also very rewarding. I felt a fulfillment I hadn't experienced as a stay-at-home mom, and I enjoyed every day. Of course, Susan wasn't happy to see me so full of life now that I was working. Her bullying got even worse when I was at home.
Have you been slacking off on cooking lately? Do you really think that's acceptable for a housewife?
I'm sorry, I haven't had much time. I'm doing my best to make proper meals, though.
You went out and got a job on your own, so stop complaining. Also, from now on, make a separate dinner for me. I want something lighter.
Understood. Her demands kept increasing, and I had no time to rest while I was at home. I'd come back from work and immediately be swamped with housework. No matter how hard I tried, her attacks on me never stopped. On top of that, most of my paycheck went to her. I finally got a job, but I may not be able to keep it up anymore. I felt I had reached my limit. I was physically and mentally exhausted. And then, I found out Kevin was having an affair. It was the final blow to me, who who was already worn out in every way. The other woman was a new employee at Kevin's company. When his affair was exposed, Kevin said something unbelievable without a hint of remorse.
Of course, a young and pretty girl is better than a worn-out old lady like you. You're useless now.
Instead of his apologizing, he insulted me. I couldn't take it anymore, and I screamed at him. "That's it. I'm divorcing you, and you better pay me alimony."
I'll pay you the damn alimony. Take the money and get out now.
I felt tears welling up at his cruel words, but I managed to hold them back just in time. Our kids were watching our ugly fight. I swallowed my tears and looked at them. They looked back at me with thoughtful eyes, as if they were trying to process everything. A few days later, Kevin and I got divorced. When it came time to decide whether they wanted to stay with me or Kevin, the kids chose to stay in the house. That meant I would be leaving on my own. Packing up for just one person didn't take long. I quickly gathered my things and got ready to leave. When I was leaving the house, I said my final goodbye to Susan. Thinking that I'd never have to see her again, I found myself surprisingly calm as I faced her. "Well then, thank you for everything. Even if it was a short while, please take care of my kids."
Honestly, leaving your kids behind like that, you're the worst wife ever. Kevin is really better off without you. The fact that the kids didn't choose you says it all.
Puff. My kids, watching our exchange, couldn't hold back their laughter. Seeing their reaction, Susan seemed pleased and gave me a smug smile.
How sad. Even your kids are laughing at you.
I took my bags and left the house. Knowing that this was the last time she'd mock me made my steps feel much lighter. After that, I moved to an apartment near the company where I worked part-time. When I told my supervisor about my divorce and asked if I could extend my working hours, he appreciated my work and offered me a full-time position. Once I became a full-time employee, I threw myself completely into my work. When I was part-time, I barely managed to finish everything during work hours. But now, without having to worry about housework, I could help other employees, learn more, and work as much as I wanted. After about a month, I got a call from Susan on my phone. Wondering what she wanted after all this time, I answered, only to hear her pathetic, tearful voice.
Olivia, please come back now. I'm struggling so much, I feel like I'm going to collapse. The kids' schedules are all over the place with their activities and part-time jobs, so I have to cook multiple times a day. It's too much. They come back covered in dirt from their activities, and there's so much laundry to do. I'm going to get sick.
Isn't Kevin there with you? You're a family, so why don't you all help each other out?
That ungrateful son. Kevin is all caught up with some young girl from his office, and he barely comes home. He won't even answer when I call.
To be honest, I knew this would happen. Susan calling me because she couldn't handle taking care of the kids. It was all part of the kids' plan. They had seen me struggling under Susan's bullying for so long. Of course, they also knew how their dad always sided with her and only complained to me. When I decided to get my divorce, I naturally planned to take my kids with me. But they stopped me.
It's not right for you to be the only one suffering, Mom. Dad and Grandma need to learn their lesson.
Yeah, let them deal with the hardships for once.
Following the kids' plan, they intentionally stopped doing their usual chores. Normally, they were very helpful around the house, but to teach their dad and grandmother a lesson, they deliberately did nothing. Just as the kids expected, Susan gave up and reached out to me for help. According to them, things between her and Kevin were at their worst, and there were constant fights at home. As a result, Kevin no longer felt comfortable there and had almost stopped coming home. I almost burst out laughing while I was still on the phone with her. Everything had gone so perfectly according to plan. Serves her right.
Olivia, are you listening? So, when are you coming back?
I had been silent, lost in thoughts about the kid's plan, and she must have gotten anxious. She kept calling my name over and over. Well, since we're divorced, I'm basically a stranger now, right? Isn't it weird to ask a stranger to come back?
Well, I'll talk to Kevin, I promise. So please come back. Let's all live happily together again.
When I sighed and spoke, Susan tried to say something convenient for herself. When were we ever living happily together? Not even once. I'm busy, so I'm hanging up now. You all can sort things out as a family.
Wait, Olivia, don't hang up.
I cut her off and ended the call. After hanging up, I felt more refreshed than I ever had before. This must be what it feels like to finally have peace of mind. Not long after that, I got a call from my ex-husband. He must have made up his mind after being nagged by Susan. He asked me to take custody of the kids. This was the final step in our plan. I knew Kevin couldn't take care of the kids, so he would eventually turn to me. The kids were probably preparing to move in with me already. All right, I'll take custody of the kids. Let's go through the process of changing custody. Also, of course, you need to pay child support every month.
You! How dare you talk to me like that? No, I'm sorry. Please take care of the kids.
Kevin seemed irritated by my strong response, but he wasn't in a position to argue, so he had to apologize. It must have been humiliating for him to have to beg a favor from the woman he once looked down on. I felt a sense of satisfaction towards my ex-husband. All right, it's time to get ready to welcome my kids. With a bright heart, I hurried home. A few days later, my kids, Samantha and Sean, came to my place. Since both parties agreed to the custody change, it seemed like the paperwork would be done quickly, but the kids couldn't wait and came to my place ahead of time. When I searched for a new place after the divorce, I already knew I'd be taking the kids in eventually, so I rented a spacious house. Kevin wanted to end things with me as soon as possible, so he paid more alimony than usual. Thanks to that, I could afford the rent for a bigger house. As for what happened to Susan and Kevin afterward, it seemed Kevin had a rough time because of the woman he was seeing. Apparently, the woman was also dating another guy from the same department. Kevin got caught up in a love triangle at work, and things turned into a mess. Then it came out that the woman had stolen money from the company, and Kevin ended up being suspected as an accomplice. He must have taken all his frustrations and pent-up stress from work out on Susan. Unable to bear seeing her once proud son in such a miserable state, Susan lashed out at him. Kevin became mentally ill and started missing work often. Susan, in turn, kept blaming him even more, and their relationship turned toxic. You'd think that a mama's boy and his mom would enjoy living together, but it turned out to be quite an unexpected ending.
Mom, you're working late today, right? I'll make dinner.
I'm off practice today, so I'll help with dinner when I get back.
My kids called out to me as I was about to leave the house. Their kindness made me discreetly wipe my eyes. I used to be weak and just endured everything. Because of that, I went through a lot of unfair hardships. But I won't look back on the past anymore. I'm going to live strong for my kids. Thank you. I'm off. I waved slowly to my kids. With their smiles behind me, I stepped out the front door. The sky is clear again today. I looked up at the bright sun and walked forward with determined steps.
A few days after their wedding, I was at home when the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor and saw Amanda, Eric's new wife, standing there.
I came by because we wanted to talk to you, Hillary. Could you let me in?
I opened the front door and invited Amanda into my house. What could this be about? She came to my house alone without an appointment.
Eric told me that you're divorced, right, Hillary?
She asked me out of the blue. I figured she must have some ulterior motive, but I answered calmly. Yes, it was a long time ago when Eric was just a little boy. But what does that have to do with anything?
Well, I wasn't expecting much since you're single, but I was wondering about the inheritance. I mean, even if it's just a formality, I think it's important to check on your assets.
Now I understood why Amanda had come here without Eric. This daughter-in-law standing in front of me had come to see how much savings I had. It seemed Amanda realized she wouldn't get any money out of me, so she said,
Actually, Hillary, I came here today to ask you for something.
Ask me for something? When I asked, Amanda nodded and smiled at me. I started to get a really bad feeling.
I want to cut ties with you since you're practically a stranger to me.
Amanda blurted out. Practically a stranger?
Well, isn't it true? So from now on, we don't want you to have anything to do with our family. I definitely don't want to take care of you when you get old. So let's just cut ties and be done with it.
Amanda said this with a cheerful smile, leaving me completely stunned. Seeing that I was at a loss for words, Amanda stood up as if satisfied.
Well, then, neither Eric nor I will have anything to do with you from now on. So don't bother contacting us. Goodbye now.
With that, she quickly left the house. My name is Hillary. I'm in my 60s, living alone in a rural area, relying on my pension. Back in my younger days, I was a real workaholic and managed to save up quite a bit. I grew up in a poor family, so right after graduating high school, I started working. I didn't have any desire to go to college. Instead, I just wanted to start earning money as soon as possible. I met my husband at the company where I got my first job. He was close to my age, and we gradually grew closer through shared interests until we eventually started dating. When we first met, he was already thinking about starting his own business.
I've been saving money all this time to make my dream come true.
That's an amazing dream. I'll support you all the way.
He smiled happily and said,
Then, let's get married when I make that dream come true.
He held my hand and made that promise to me. To support him, I worked as hard as I could. Thanks to those efforts, he succeeded in starting his business a year after making that promise. And we really did get married. Before long, our son Eric was born, making us a family of 3. Though life wasn't particularly stable, we were happy in our own modest way. But that happiness didn't last long. I found out that my husband, whom I had trusted, was cheating on me. We had many discussions, but in the end, he chose his affair over me, and we got divorced. It was a shock, but I couldn't afford to be depressed. With Eric in my life, I couldn't just stand still. I worked hard, raising Eric on my own, and somehow managed to get by. While we never lived a wealthy life, things were more stable than when my husband was struggling to get his business off the ground. I was also able to save money more easily. Eventually, Eric grew up, studied diligently, and got into college. I paid for all of Eric's college expenses. I wanted him to enjoy his college life without any worries. The money I had saved up over the years for his future really paid off. As a parent, it's the greatest joy.
Thanks, Mom. I'll work hard so I can repay you someday.
Eric said that to me, his eyes welling up with tears. There's no need for him to repay me. As long as he lives a happy life, that's all I need to be happy. Eric graduated from college without any issues and landed a job at a well-known company in New York. After Eric became independent and moved to the city, I decided to sell my house and move into a one-bedroom apartment. Even though the house Eric grew up in was no longer ours, it was actually his idea for me to move.
I think it's time for you to start living your own life, Mom.
Living my own life?
Yes. Now that I'm moving to the city and living on my own, I think you should do what makes you happy. For example, selling this big house and moving to a smaller place.
He had a point. I had originally gotten the house after my divorce from my ex-husband. Back then, we didn't have much money, but we were able to buy this house at a very low price. It was an old house, and I had started to feel that it wasn't really suitable for living in anymore. Eric's suggestion opened my eyes. Moving? I never thought about that.
There are apartments made just for single people nowadays. I think you'd be more comfortable living in one of those.
The more Eric talked, the more convinced I became. And so, I decided to move into an apartment. Since I had reached the age where I could collect my pension, I shifted to working part-time while receiving my benefits. I never imagined that at this age, I'd be living in such a different way. I was actually pretty excited about this new chapter in my life. Living alone in the apartment turned out to be quite fulfilling. However, spending more time at home made me feel a bit restless, to be honest. As a workaholic and someone who's always been thrifty, I wasn't used to having so much free time. One day, during this new routine, Eric came to visit my apartment.
Hey, Mom. It's been a while.
It had been some time since I last saw Eric, and though he looked a little more mature, that kind smile of his hadn't changed. Seeing him, I felt a sense of relief. It seemed like he was doing well since moving to the city. It's been a while, but what brings you here all of a sudden?
Well, there's something I wanted to talk to you about.
Eric said, looking a bit embarrassed. Well, come on in. I invited him inside, still curious about what he wanted to say.
Actually, I'm thinking about getting married.
Getting married? Eric's unexpected words made me ask again without thinking. It wasn't surprising that I was shocked, since Eric had never mentioned anything about his relationship before. What's she like?
She's my colleague, a senior at my company. Her name is Amanda.
So she's older than you. When I responded, Eric blushed a little, clearly embarrassed. Eric had always had a thing for older girls, even when he was young. It seems that hasn't changed now that he's an adult.
I just proposed to her the other day, and she said yes. So now we're planning to get married and have our wedding.
Really? That's wonderful. Congratulations. I had been so surprised that I forgot to congratulate him, but I quickly corrected that. Hearing my words, Eric looked genuinely happy. As I continued to listen, it became clear that Amanda, Eric's fiancée, had a bit of a strong personality. Given Eric's naturally quiet nature, it seemed she often took the lead in their relationship. But no matter who she was, as long as Eric had chosen her, I was ready to welcome her into my family.
I couldn't bring her with me today, but Amanda said she'd like to meet you, so I'll bring her over next time.
All right, I'm looking forward to it, but Eric?
Yes. What is it?
I gently reminded Eric. Next time, make sure to call ahead before you come. I'm not always home, you know. Eric's expression made it clear he had completely forgotten about that. I'm sure he was so eager to tell me in person that he just showed up. Even though a phone call would have sufficed, he made the effort to come in person. I was deeply grateful for how much Eric cared about me. The next time Eric contacted me was a week later. On the day he was supposed to bring Amanda, I woke up early, feeling a bit nervous as I waited for him to arrive. I couldn't help but wonder how strong Amanda's personality really was. Since I only had Eric's perspective, it was hard for me to judge. To be honest, I was a little anxious. As I was thinking about this, the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor and saw Eric, so I headed to the door. Welcome. I greeted them warmly, and there stood Eric and a woman.
Mom, this is Amanda, the woman I've been seeing. Amanda, this is my mom.
Eric introduced us, and I smiled at Amanda, who was standing before me. Nice to meet you, Amanda. Thank you for coming all this way. I greeted her, but Amanda didn't smile. Instead, she stared at me intently. It felt like I was being scrutinized. It wasn't the kind of behavior you'd expect from someone coming to meet their future-in-law for the first time. Amanda was openly staring at me without any hesitation. At this point, I had nothing but a bad feeling. After a while, Amanda, seeming satisfied, lazily returned my greeting.
Hi, I'm Amanda.
I felt a little guilty, but while Amanda was observing me, I was also taking the opportunity to observe her. She had a somewhat sharp look, her makeup was heavy, almost reminiscent of a young party girl, and her outfit was flashy. It was obvious that the bag she was carrying was a brand name. Of course, I couldn't judge her personality based on appearances alone, but I couldn't help but glance at her now and then. I invited them into the living room, and we sat down to talk. The first topic that came up was their wedding. As soon as the subject was brought up, Amanda's eyes lit up, and she leaned forward.
The wedding has been my dream since I was little.
Oh, really?
That's why I refuse to compromise on anything. I plan to get everything I want, so please be prepared for that, Hillary.
Amanda said this directly to me. Okay, do your best. I responded, though I was a bit taken aback. Why was Amanda saying this to me? I could understand her telling Eric, her future husband, but I didn't see why she needed to inform me. I glanced at Eric, feeling a bit concerned, but he didn't seem bothered at all, and was smiling at Amanda. That made me even more worried. After discussing some plans for the future, Eric and Amanda finally left. I was relieved that it ended without incident. But Amanda seemed like quite a handful. Her intense focus on the wedding was a bit off-putting, and her disinterest in any other topics was also concerning. I wondered if it was okay to just stand by and watch over the two of them. These thoughts ran through my mind as I reflected on the day's events. But Eric is an adult now, and there's nothing I can do for him anymore. With that in mind, I decided not to interfere further. I thought that would be the end of it, but a few days later, Eric came back again. This time, he seemed unusually down. What happened?
A few days after meeting you, Amanda and I went to discuss the wedding plans, but it's going to cost way more than we expected.
Eric said this, looking downcast. It turns out that he and Amanda had been making good progress with the wedding preparations. However, during the meeting, Eric was shocked when he saw the total cost. I had expected as much. From the way Amanda talked before, it was clear that she wanted a very lavish wedding. She had mentioned wanting to hold the ceremony at a certain theme park when they visited my home, so it was no surprise that it would cost more than usual. It's only natural that it would be expensive.
I know, but I already promised to pay for it, so I can't back out now.
Eric responded in a dejected voice. It seemed he was planning to cover all the wedding expenses himself. But if this was Amanda's dream wedding, why wasn't she contributing anything? I couldn't help but feel puzzled and uneasy, but it was clear that Eric wanted to prioritize Amanda's wishes.
But Amanda really wants this dream wedding, so I want to make it happen for her somehow.
But do you even have that kind of money? If you did, you wouldn't have come here to talk to me, right?
If I don't have enough, I'm thinking about taking out a loan. That's why I wanted to tell you first, Mom.
Eric answered, his face deadly serious, and I could tell he meant every word. He wasn't asking me for money, probably because he assumed I didn't have any as a single parent. I took an envelope from the drawer and handed it to Eric. Here, use this.
What is this?
I was planning to give it to you when you became independent. There's about $60,000 in it. When I said that, Eric's eyes widened in shock. The truth was, I had been saving this money for Eric's future. I hadn't anticipated using it for something like a wedding, but I was glad it could help him now. That should be enough, right? When I asked, Eric's eyes filled with tears, and he smiled with pure joy.
Mom, thank you so much.
I couldn't help but feel a bit exasperated by his reaction, but I also found it endearing. Eric is such a kind-hearted person. He always puts others before himself, and it seems that hasn't changed as he's grown older. For someone like Eric, I didn't mind giving up that $60,000, even if it was to fulfill Amanda's extravagant wishes. I decided to keep quiet about covering all the wedding expenses to protect Eric's pride. There was no need for Amanda to know. Eventually, Eric and Amanda had their wedding at the theme park as planned. When I arrived at the venue, I was amazed by how lavish it was. Given how grand it was, it made sense that it would be expensive. Amanda was in high spirits the whole time, and Eric looked genuinely happy watching her. I was truly glad that my money was useful. The beautiful wedding went off without a hitch. A few days after the wedding, the doorbell rang while I was at home. I checked the monitor and saw Amanda standing there alone. Amanda, what brings you here? I called out to her, and she smiled warmly.
I came by because I wanted to talk to you, Hillary. Could you let me in?
Well, come on in. I opened the door and invited Amanda inside. What could this be about? She came to my house alone without an appointment. I motioned for Amanda to have a seat. She glanced around the house, her eyes darting from one corner to another. As I braced myself for whatever she was about to say, Amanda narrowed her eyes and looked at me. Then she asked me,
Eric told me you're divorced, right, Hillary?
The unexpected question made me pause as I was about to pour tea. But I quickly smiled gently, trying not to show any sign of being rattled. Yes, that's right. It happened when Eric was very young.
Oh, I see. What did you do with the alimony from that? Is there any left?
I used it for Eric's education and other expenses, but why do you ask? I responded firmly, still smiling, despite Amanda's blunt questioning. I was a bit shaken, but my irritation with Amanda far outweighed it. Without flinching at my silent anger, Amanda calmly continued.
Well, since you're single, I didn't expect much, but I just wanted to check on your assets since you were still technically family.
Now it was clear why Amanda had come to my house without Eric. This daughter-in-law of mine wanted to find out how much I had in savings. Even Eric, my own son, didn't know about the money I had saved. I had set a personal rule that I wouldn't tell him about it unless it was necessary, like when I gave him the $60,000. I didn't want to be relied on for money in the future. That savings was something I had put away for myself, and I had no intention of giving it to anyone, not even Eric. Sensing she wouldn't get any more information from me, Amanda said,
I see. So with just your pension and part-time work, it must be a pretty modest lifestyle. That's all I needed to know.
It seemed I had successfully hidden the truth. Still, I kept smiling as Amanda's gaze became even sharper.
Actually, Hillary, I came here today to ask you for something.
A favor? I asked, and Amanda nodded enthusiastically, smiling again. I started to get a really bad feeling.
Eric and I are now a family. So that means we're a separate family from you now, right?
What are you trying to say?
I mean, I want to cut ties with you since you're practically a stranger to us now.
Amanda declared. Practically a stranger?
Well, isn't it true? So from now on, I don't want you involved with our family. I definitely don't want to take care of you when you're older. So let's just cut ties now.
Amanda said this with a cheerful smile, leaving me completely stunned. First, she comes to my house unannounced, then starts digging into my finances and personal matters I'd rather keep private. Now, realizing she won't get anything from me, she suddenly wants to cut ties. This is completely outrageous. Is this really how you treat your in-laws? While I remained silent, she stood up as if satisfied.
Well then, Eric and I won't have anything to do with you anymore. So please don't contact us either. All right, take care.
With that, Amanda quickly left the house. I was so stunned by the whirlwind that was Amanda that I couldn't even respond. For a while, I just stood there in shock, but then I quickly snapped out of it and called Eric. There's no way that my kind-hearted Eric would actually agree to cut ties with me like Amanda said. Thinking this had to be a mistake, I clutched my phone with trembling hands. Thankfully, Eric answered right away. Eric, Amanda just came over and said she wants to cut ties with me. Are you really planning on doing that too? I asked in a panic, and Eric responded as if he had just remembered something.
Well, Amanda doesn't want to have anything to do with you, so I think I'll just go along with what she wants.
The moment I heard those words, my mind went blank. I couldn't believe it. Eric was really going to let Amanda dictate even something as important as our relationship as mother and son. I was completely disappointed in him. The kind, considerate Eric I thought I knew seemed to be nothing more than a figment of my imagination.
I'm grateful to you for raising me, and I appreciate everything you've done. But from now on, I want us to live our lives without relying on each other.
Living independently and cutting ties are two different things.
But Amanda doesn't want to have anything to do with you, and I think it can't be helped.
I was beyond exasperated. At the same time, I was so shocked that I almost blurted out everything Amanda had said to me. But I swallowed my emotions and calmly replied, "Fine, but don't ever rely on me again. Consider the money I gave you for your wedding as the final payment. I won't be helping you anymore." To this, Eric simply responded, "I understand." His response made it seem like he didn't grasp the gravity of cutting ties with his own mother. After hearing Eric's reply, I hung up the phone. For a while after, I just sat there, unable to move. I felt an overwhelming sense of regret, not just for the $60,000 I spent on the wedding, but for how Eric didn't even acknowledge it. I also felt deep resentment toward Amanda, who had driven a wedge between us. But more than anything, I was heartbroken that my bond with Eric had been severed in such a way. A few hours later, I called up my friend and went out for drinks at a bar. This friend is one of my best friends, someone I've been close with since our school days. We know everything about each other, and she knows Eric well too.
Wow, it sounds like Eric is totally under his wife's thumb.
Yeah, it sure seems that way. I was venting to my friend about what happened that day. She listened to me kindly, nodding along. I tried to act like it didn't bother me, but honestly, I'm devastated. Amanda kept asking about money. It feels like Eric only talked to me about the wedding expenses because they wanted the money from the start.
Yeah, it really does seem like they took advantage of you. Maybe they figured if they brought up the idea of going into debt, you'd offer to help out.
Hearing this from my friend only made me feel worse. I had given $60,000 to my son and his wife, who had turned out to be like this. Honestly, I couldn't help but think I really misjudged the situation. What's going to happen to me now? I had this vague sense of unease.
Well then, why not use the money you've saved up to do something you love?
Do something I love. Surprised by my friend's unexpected suggestion, I looked up.
Yeah, go somewhere far away from Eric and his wife. Like, why not move abroad?
She said with a cheerful laugh, showing me something. It looked like a plane ticket. The destination was listed as Kuala Lumpur from New York. Malaysia?
That's right. I was just about to invite you on a trip. What do you think? Why not visit first before you decide to move?
She said this with a bright smile. Whenever I was going through tough times, my friend was always there to support me. She had lost her husband a few years ago and had no children, so she'd been living alone since then. But she seemed to be thoroughly enjoying her life, living independently and full of energy. So, to take my mind off things, I decided to go on a trip to Malaysia with her. I hadn't flown much in my life, so I felt pretty nervous as we boarded the plane and headed for Malaysia. It had been a long time since I'd been on a plane, and I was quite anxious. Everything about Malaysia was new to me. We visited the Petronas Twin Towers, which I'd only seen in pictures and other tourist spots. I really enjoyed the trip.
I've always planned to move abroad.
My friend said one evening as we looked at the night sky from our hotel.
I always wanted to ask you to come with me, but I hesitated because I knew you had Eric. But the truth is, I've always wanted to live here with you.
Really? With me? I couldn't hide my surprise at her unexpected words. Had she needed me this whole time? The thought warmed my heart. Seeing my reaction, my friend smiled gently and asked,
"What do you think, Hillary? Wouldn't you like to live here?"
I seriously considered her question. Malaysia's cost of living is much lower than in the US. With my savings and pension, I could probably live comfortably. I think the language barrier will be okay in the current situation. And if I were to live with my friend, it would certainly be an interesting experience. Instead of feeling anxious, I started to get excited about the possibilities ahead. I think I'd like to try living here, and if I get to live with you, I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. When I said that, my friend laughed joyfully. I decided it was time to forget about Eric. From now on, I'm no longer Eric's parent, and there's no need to watch over Eric and Amanda. I realized it was okay to spend time on myself for a change. After returning to the US, my friend and I started the process of moving. There were a few hurdles, but we successfully made our way to Malaysia. Once I got there, I realized that living somewhere is quite different from just visiting. But I was having a great time every day with her. Before I knew it, a year had passed since we moved to Malaysia. I had gotten used to the lifestyle and was enjoying every day to the fullest. Then one day, I received a call on my phone. The call seemed to be from the US. When I checked the number, I realized it was from Eric, the son I had cut ties with. At first, I ignored it, thinking, what could he want now? But Eric kept calling persistently. Unsure of what to do, I consulted my friend and decided to answer the phone just this once.
Hey, Mom. It's been a while. It's me.
When I answered, I heard Eric's cheerful voice. It hadn't changed at all since the last time I heard it. But that didn't mean I could just forget what happened. Who is this?
What are you talking about? It's your son.
Eric responded happily, but his reaction only made me more wary. Eric and I had cut ties. I never expected to hear from him again. So why was he calling now? I took a deep breath to calm myself. I was told we were cutting ties, so I don't have a son anymore.
Yeah, I know, and I'm really sorry about that. I'm asking for your forgiveness.
Eric's tone was casual, as if he wasn't really listening to what I was saying. I had already decided I would never forgive Eric, but I figured I could at least hear him out. So, what do you want?
Well, we had a baby.
Eric said excitedly. I motioned for my friend to come over and put the phone on speaker.
A baby, Mom. You're a grandmother now. We want you to come meet the baby.
Oh, really?
Amanda is here with me now. She wants to see you too. I'll put her on the phone.
At that moment, Eric passed the phone to Amanda, and that annoying grating voice filled the line.
Oh, Hillary. Long time no see.
I sighed and decided not to respond to her. My friend, sitting next to me, was shaking with laughter at my obvious reaction.
It's your grandchild, Hillary. You should come with gifts and visit us. We went by your house. but we were shocked to find you'd moved.
The moment I heard Amanda say this, my suspicions were confirmed. Eric and Amanda must have had the baby and found themselves needing money. It made sense that they would turn to me, thinking I might still have some savings. Maybe they thought I'd be thrilled about having a grandchild and that I'd offer to help. From what Amanda was saying, it seemed they hadn't realized I had moved abroad.
Hey, Mom, where are you anyway?
There's no way I'm telling you that, considering we've cut ties, and since I don't have a son anymore, that child isn't my grandchild. When I said that, there was a stunned silence on the other end. After a moment, they both started speaking, sounding flustered.
Come on, you're still going on about that? I already apologized, didn't I?
Yeah, Hillary, stop being so stubborn and come see us.
I exchanged a glance with my friend. If you can pay me back the $60,000 I spent on your wedding all at once, then maybe I'll forgive you.
$60,000 for the wedding? Don't be ridiculous. That was money Eric spent for me.
Oh, really? He came to me claiming he didn't have any money, but I guess he didn't tell you that. I told Eric that the $60,000 was a parting gift. I could hear Eric and Amanda arguing on the other end of the line.
What's going on?
No, it's not like that.
My friend was laughing so hard, trying not to be heard. And watching her made me start laughing too. Aren't you ashamed of yourselves? I'm embarrassed to think of you as my family. At this, their attention snapped back to me, and they started desperately saying all sorts of things.
Hillary, wait. We're really grateful for the wedding money. So let's just put the past behind us and get along again.
I want to see you, Mom. And that $60,000 was meant for me, wasn't it? So I don't think I need to pay it back.
I was beyond exasperated. That was before we cut ties. If you hadn't turned your back on me then, you might have continued to benefit from my support.
But we can still make things right if we start fresh now.
Eric was clearly trying hard to get back into my good graces, with Amanda chiming in from the background. I sighed deeply, utterly fed up. There's no chance we'll ever meet again. You'll never find out where I am, no matter how much you search. So this is really goodbye. Farewell, I said, ignoring their protests as I hung up the phone.
They're living in a fantasy world, aren't they?
Absolutely, it's just ridiculous. We looked at each other and laughed, then continued enjoying our drinks. To make sure my phone didn't ring again, I turned it off. After that, I changed my phone number, as my friend suggested. I was never very good with smartphones, so I didn't really know how to block or reject calls. To make sure I wouldn't be contacted again, I decided to change my number entirely. Before I changed it, I got a call from a relative telling me that Eric and Amanda had come to them asking for money. Apparently, Amanda had been quite reckless with money and had borrowed from several companies. As I heard more details, I found out that Amanda had already been in debt for hundreds of thousands of dollars before she got married. All those expensive brand name bags and long, manicured nails were funded by debt. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. Knowing Amanda, it was all just for show. This led to fights between her and Eric, and eventually, Amanda had to sell her bags and other belongings to repay some of the debt. But of course, that didn't solve all their problems. This caused a huge rift between Amanda and Eric, and they eventually divorced. Amanda took custody of their child and returned to her parents' houses, But when her parents heard what had happened, they were furious. While they were taking care of their grandchild, they ignored Amanda. Feeling abandoned, Amanda started frequenting host clubs to fill the void, racking up even more debt. Amanda's life spiraled out of control, and I couldn't help but laugh at the thought. Eric's life took a similar downward turn. On top of paying child support, he was too embarrassed to tell anyone about the divorce after their big, lavish wedding, so he kept pretending they were still a happy family. But eventually, the truth came out, and his friends, fed up with his lies, started distancing themselves from him. The only people who would still talk to Eric were women at the bars he frequented. With Amanda caught up in her obsession with host clubs, it seemed that the two of them were doomed to similar fates. When I explained to my relatives that I had cut ties with Eric and what had happened back then, they understood. There wouldn't be anyone left to help them now. Eric used to be such a good, responsible kid. But after he got involved with Amanda, he changed completely. But that's no longer my concern. I've decided not to dwell on the past and to live my own life. Now, I've started making jewelry with my friend. It's just a hobby for now, but maybe one day we'll sell our pieces. My second life is just beginning.
Since it's important, I'll say it first. Hand over all the money.
What? Money? Seeing my confusion, my sister-in-law Michelle sneered at me.
I'm going to manage the money. Don't get ahead of yourself just because you're his wife.
What does someone who has not visited this house for 10 years have to say now?
Are you planning to disobey?
The moment I saw Michelle smirking with that nasty look on her face. At that moment, something inside me, which had been tightly wound since my husband's death, snapped with an audible sound. Obey her? There's no way I'll let this selfish woman take my precious money and time. She'll regret this. My name is Amy. Last week, on my 65th birthday, my husband John's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse, and he passed away. Since then, I've been so busy that I haven't even had time to mourn, and today is finally his funeral. I stare at John's smiling photo. I can't believe this happened so suddenly. I remember a conversation we had not too long ago. He talked happily about how we should start walking to enjoy travel during our retirement, how he wanted to get better at cooking, and how he wanted to take up photography again, which had been his hobby. We never doubted we'd continue to live our lives as usual. My tears almost welled up, but I took a deep breath. I can't stay depressed forever. I can't make him hesitate on his journey because of my sadness. I'm sure he must also be worried about his mother, who has lived with us for years. But I'll take care of her, just like always, so he shouldn't worry. Still, going before his mother, what an unfilial son. My mother-in-law, Susan, has mild dementia. She often repeats old stories, forgets things, or mistakes people. It's like she's gone back to her childhood, sometimes daydreaming or acting selfishly. Her legs and back are bad, so she needs help changing clothes and using the bathroom, but after 7 years of caring for her, I've gotten used to it. Life with just the two of us will probably be lonelier than before. Maybe I'll ask her to tell me stories of my husband's childhood when that time comes. After the funeral was completed without incident, I finished the remaining paperwork and cleanup, and my bereavement leave ended. I returned to my usual routine of caring for Susan, doing housework, and working part-time. John was always naturally present, as if it was the most normal thing, and he was a quiet man. That's why I still don't feel any significant change. On the other hand, when I offer flowers to John, now reduced to a small box, the loneliness overwhelms me. Susan seems to be acting normal, but I think she must be even sadder than I am. She talks to my husband in her memories while looking through an old photo album we pulled out of the closet. On the days I work part-time, I rely on a helper to take care of Susan. It's only twice a week, but it gives me some pocket money and a chance to take a breather. It keeps my mind off things more than staying at home all the time. After going back to work after a long time, finishing my usual tasks and shopping before it got dark, I came home. When I got back, I realized it. Shopping as usual left too much food. John was a big eater. Cooking doesn't feel as rewarding anymore. Again, the loneliness crept up on me. I'm home, I said quietly as I entered the house. It was so soft that Susan couldn't hear, so there was no response. Just as I thought that, a cheerful woman's voice came from inside the house, throwing me off.
Welcome back.
The helper should have locked the door when she left, so who could it be?
Hello, Amy.
Michelle? It was my sister-in-law, Michelle. It seemed she had used a spare key to get in. Who gave her a spare key? This had never happened before, so I thought it might be an emergency, but apparently it wasn't. Because she was relaxing and watching TV. I felt a surge of discomfort at the sight. What is she doing barging into someone else's house without permission? Why'd you come over without any notice? I'm not usually the type to speak before thinking. But I couldn't hold back my emotions, and it came out sounding sarcastic. Michelle answered, looking annoyed.
Do I need to give notice to come back to my own parents' house?
Of course you do. I wanted to say that, but I held my tongue. No need to cause any more trouble. She's more than 10 years younger than John, still in her late 40s, and to put it nicely, she's lively and sociable. She probably thinks of herself that way, but to me, she's just loud and careless. Because of her personality, she got along very poorly with her late father. When she left home to get married, she left on bad terms, even cutting ties with her family, and she didn't even attend her father's funeral 5 years ago. I still don't know what she found so displeasing. But I clearly remember her suddenly showing up at John's funeral recently, loudly reminiscing with her old friends and relatives. I'd heard rumors that she's reckless with money and even has debts that her husband doesn't know about. I can see that.
Amy, where have you been?
Work.
You left Mom here alone, locking her in a room all by herself.
Michelle gave me a look of disbelief. What a terrible way to put it. I didn't lock her in or anything. I had the helper come while I was working. She should have just left a little while ago.
What is this? Paying a helper while you go to work? Does that make any sense? Ridiculous. Instead of going to work, why not just take care of Mom yourself?
I was at a loss for words at such an unexpected comment. I've managed to balance my part-time job and caring for Susan for years now. And now she says this, after leaving home so dramatically when she was younger? Michelle noticed the dissatisfaction on my face and let out an exaggerated sigh.
I thought it must be tough now that John's gone, but you're already back at work. You really are cold-hearted, Amy. You're just dumping mom's care on someone else because you don't want to be here?
What? Michelle looked at me coldly. She kept pressing me even more as I became increasingly unsettled.
John would be heartbroken if he knew. You're abandoning your responsibilities as his wife. How could you?
Being told all this, I couldn't help but feel anger rising within me. I'm trying to face the reality that my husband's gone. Would she be satisfied if I just stayed home and cried?
Now that John's gone, I don't feel comfortable leaving this house and mom in your hands, John's wife.
I tilted my head in confusion. Sure, my husband is gone, but we're already living on pension, and we have some savings, so as long as I don't get extravagant, I can manage fine. Besides, I've been taking care of Susan for 7 years now. Michelle's words are out of line.
Hey, since I went out of my way to come here, hand it over already.
Michelle suddenly showed me her palm. What?
What do you mean, what? Give me my share.
I was even more confused. Did I have something to give Michelle?
I'm John's sister. Half of his inheritance is mine, isn't it?
Half? Michelle smirked. Is this a threat? Well, I think you're misunderstanding, but you don't have any inheritance share.
What do you mean?
What I mean is, it's strange for a sibling to inherit anything. Even though we don't have kids, Susan is still alive, so there's no inheritance for siblings.
Is that so? But this house should be mine, right? Mom has an inheritance share, doesn't she?
But Susan is still alive.
What are you saying? She won't stay healthy forever. When that time comes, it'll be my house, so you shouldn't stick your nose in it.
Whether Michelle understood it or not, the fact is that this house will never be mine. It's solely in Susan's name, and it never belonged to my late husband, so it won't ever be mine. Greedy as she is, Michelle is closer to having a claim. When my father-in-law passed away, Michelle gave up her inheritance. She didn't get along well with him, and besides, he had some debts from his business. At that time, Michelle had said,
I'm not taking any inheritance. I know there's debt from the business. You just want me to pay up because I married into a wealthy family, don't you? Not gonna happen. I'm married now, and it's none of my business.
Since John also gave up his share when his father passed, Susan inherited the house and the debt. It wasn't a huge debt, and John was able to pay it off on her behalf afterward. Anyway, just because John has passed doesn't mean Michelle has any inheritance rights. When I patiently explained this, Michelle's face grew more and more sullen. At that moment, Susan called out to me from her room. Probably needed the restroom. I gave a word to Michelle and headed to Susan's room. After helping her in the restroom, I returned to the living room with her, only to find Michelle was gone. Feeling something was off, I looked around her room and noticed that several of the antique vases Susan had cherished and collected over the years were missing. Since when? I didn't see it happen, but it could only have been Michelle who took them. I can't make sense of this. She said whatever she wanted, and when she realized she wasn't getting any inheritance, did she take Susan's collection as payback? I don't want to believe it, but there's no one else.
Amy, what's wrong?
Susan asked, noticing my demeanor. I forced a smile to keep her from worrying. Michelle was just here. Well, it seemed like she was worried about you and me. I wrapped my response in a thick layer of sugar coating, but Susan seemed to see through it.
Oh, really? I wanted to see her. If she comes again, Make sure you tell me.
5 days later, Michelle showed up again. Of course, it was unannounced. And today, she even showed up with a moving company, stacking a ton of boxes in front of the house. What? Michelle, what are all these boxes? It seemed Michelle couldn't hear my panicked voice as she continued giving instructions to the movers.
Put the heavy stuff inside the front door. There's an elderly person here, so keep it quiet.
Wait a minute, you can't just do this without asking. I stopped the movers from entering the house and stood in front of Michelle. What do you think you're doing?
Isn't it obvious?
No, it's not.
Keep your voice down. What if Mom hears you?
Michelle gave me a sharp look. If she's worried about her hearing, it must mean she knows she's doing something wrong.
Did you lock Mom in her room again today?
Of course not.
I doubt it.
Anyway, what is all this? Michelle sneered at my frustration.
I told you before, right? I can't trust the house and Mom to you.
Even so, this is obviously.
Exactly. As you guessed, I've moved in.
What about your own house? Then Michelle said something unbelievable.
I got divorced and came back.
What?
It's only natural, considering the importance of this house.
I had no idea what she was talking about. She came to John's funeral with her husband. When did you get divorced?
Just last week.
Why?
I already told you, for the sake of this houses.
Since I couldn't understand it at all, I went through it step by step. So you're moving into this house?
Yeah, obviously.
Well, does that mean you're going to take care of Susan?
What are you talking about? That's your job, Amy.
Then, are you going to help with the household chores?
Why would I do that?
Then, are you going to earn money to replace what John used to bring in?
That's impossible.
There couldn't be any reason for Michelle to get divorced. She had a wealthy and kind husband, so she shouldn't have had any complaints. My head was spinning. I needed to calm down. Living with Michelle in this house would be absolutely impossible. Actually, it's just out of the question. Where did you take Susan's collection of vases? When I asked, as if remembering, Michelle answered without any sign of remorse.
I sold them. I needed moving funds.
What?
What's the big deal? I can do whatever I want with things in my own parents' house, can't I?
What? I was so taken aback that I couldn't find any word. That's right, I should go call Susan. She told me to always do that when Michelle came over. But before I could, Michelle noticed and stopped me.
Wait a minute.
What?
I'll tell Mom myself, so just keep quiet.
Huh?
It'd be better if I explained it instead of you.
But
if you understand, help move the stuff in.
The place Michelle chose was my husband's study, which I had only halfway cleaned up. Michelle, wait. I don't want you to put anything in this room. I refused, but Michelle didn't care at all.
What? Are you daughter-in-law living in my parents' house, trying to tell me what to do?
She continued carrying her stuff in without a care.
This room is perfect. Great sunlight.
Michelle marched right into John's room. My chest tightened. Sure, this may be your parents' house, but it's also the home I've cherished for decades. You can't just show up unannounced and expect me to accept it.
Since it's important, I'll say it first. Hand over all the money.
What money?
Yeah, all the money in this house is.
My confused mind went into further panic. All of it? What are you talking about? You were mistaken before, saying half of it was yours. And now what? Michelle sneered.
I couldn't believe I didn't get a share, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Since I'm back and I'll be managing the house and the money, it's only natural that I get everything, right? Don't act high and mighty over me, his sister, just because you're his wife.
What? Hearing Michelle's self-centered reasoning made even less sense to me.
If you don't want to obey, then you can leave, for all I care.
The moment I saw Susan smirking with that nasty look on her face, at that moment, something inside me, which had been tightly wound since John's death, snapped with an audible sound. There's no way I'll let this selfish woman take my precious money and time. I responded calmly. Got it. I have no intention of obeying you. I'll leave this house right away. Michelle's smile vanished at my firm attitude.
What about Mom?
Just like you said, I'm only John's wife, so I won't meddle anymore. I'll leave her to you.
What? How cold can you be?
Look who's talking. You've ignored Susan all this time.
Who do you think you're talking to? Apologize now.
I ignored her and quickly packed my things. Then I went to Susan's room on the first floor, opened the door, and said loudly, Susan, I've been told to leave, so I'm doing just that. Susan looked at me, bewildered, as I spoke quickly. Michelle will be taking care of this house. With that, I stormed out of the house. Michelle was yelling something, but I absolutely refused to turn back. She knows nothing, always doing whatever she wants. She'll regret it. 1 week later, I had 50 missed calls on my phone. I couldn't answer because I was in a meeting. Just as I was about to call back, the phone rang again. Hello.
Is this Amy?
No.
Aren't you my sister-in-law, Amy?
You must have the wrong number. I don't have a sister-in-law.
Cut the nonsense. Please help me.
Help you? Me?
Yes, we're family, aren't we?
Help? Family? Who?
Don't mess with me.
I answered calmly to Michelle's shouting. You want my help, don't you? What kind of attitude is that?
No. Why are you saying such things?
I could hear Susan yelling in the background of Michelle's distressed voice.
After you're done with the laundry, start cleaning. Hurry up.
Hey, did you hear that? What do you mean, dementia? She's more energetic than ever.
Oh, Michelle, didn't you know? Susan's dementia has gotten a lot better.
What?
Of course you wouldn't know, right? You've been avoiding Susan for years now.
Avoiding her? No way.
A few years ago, Susan had severe delusions. She'd get angry, mess up her room, and even leave the house without telling anyone, getting lost. It was tough back then. I couldn't handle her alone, so John and I would have to bring her back together. It was around the time when Susan injured her leg and couldn't walk well, and everyone in the family was under stress. Ever since the helper recommended it back then, she's been playing online games daily.
Online games?
Yeah, it really seemed to suit her, and her dementia gradually improved. She's not just staying shut in her room, but gaming. Before I knew it, She was back to living a regular life, just like she used to. It makes me happy.
Gaming? I thought she was quietly staying in her room, but she's calling me every second, being demanding, giving me lectures. It's exhausting.
What? That can't be.
Amy, you've been dealing with all this the whole time?
How dare you refer to her like that? Who do you think you're talking to?
It seemed Susan had grabbed the phone.
Amy, thanks to you not relying on Michelle and having a helper come every day, I'm doing just fine.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm relieved.
So, how's it going? Is everything settled?
Yes, all done. I just finished the meeting. I'm ready whenever you are, Susan.
Great. Then let's get moving right away.
I returned home with only a small bag. There was no need for the big luggage I had when I left. When I got home, my mother-in-law greeted me.
Welcome back. I've been waiting.
Next to her, Michelle looked completely worn out. She seemed like a different person. It seemed Michelle had been thoroughly bossed around by Susan. By the way, Susan usually isn't like that. She must have wanted to teach Michelle a lesson for selling her collection without permission.
I'm exhausted. I'm going to rest, so take me to my room.
I took Susan to her room as she asked, and Michelle's attitude immediately changed.
Where did you run off to? Think about the situation I'm in. I have no place to go, so cooperate.
I tilted my head. Isn't that her own fault?
If you can't stay here, then it's the park and homelessness for you. You should be grateful just to have a roof over your head.
I tilted my head even more. Well, so what do you want exactly?
Think from the position of you. Her daughter-in-law handles the chores and caregiving. I, as a family, manage the money. Basically, it's an employment relationship, right? You're just a maid for our family.
I was so shocked I couldn't say anything. Maybe something was loose in Michelle's head. Wasn't she a wife herself until just recently? What did Susan say about us living together? When I asked, Michelle answered with a smug look.
She said to leave the house to me.
I see. Makes sense. I replied calmly, while Michelle gave me a puzzled look.
You're taking this pretty well. Were you prepared for this?
Yes.
Well, whatever. Since Mom said so, you understand, right? Hurry up and come back and do the chores and caregiving like before.
No.
What?
Just like Susan said, I'm leaving this houses to you, Michelle. Mostly for the cleanup.
What do you mean?
We're moving out tomorrow.
Moving?
Yes, I've been handling paperwork and preparations all the way up until today. If you don't leave soon, Michelle, you'll be trespassing.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Since Michelle didn't understand, I decided to make it clear. This house has already been sold.
What? How could you do something like that without permission? John would be heartbroken.
Yeah, he probably would be. He was looking forward to the move.
What do you mean?
I mean, John also agreed to sell the houses.
What?
We bought a senior-friendly condo, so Susan will be moving there with me.
Moving out?
Considering Susan and our future, a senior-friendly condo with accessible facilities is much better than a big house with a garden that's hard to maintain.
Wouldn't it be better to live comfortably for the rest of our lives?
Since John said that, both Susan and I, of course, agreed. I never imagined he'd be gone so soon, though.
No one told me.
What?
This is my family home. Isn't it wrong not to consult me?
The house belongs to Susan. We don't need the permission of someone who just barged in to live here. Honestly, that was a bit harsh. Michelle is technically an interested party since she's a presumptive heir of Susan's. But we thought dealing with her was far more troublesome. Susan may have mild dementia, but she signed a family trust, and John, who was entrusted with managing her assets, sold the house. This place already belongs to someone else. Michelle was trembling. Her face kept getting paler and paler.
Don't mess with me. Where am I supposed to live now? I've already filed for divorce.
Why don't you swallow your pride and ask your husband for forgiveness?
That's impossible. I said whatever I wanted and stormed out.
What exactly did you say?
That he's useless, earns a lousy salary, smells like old age.
The more I heard, the sorrier I felt for her husband. He was such a kind man, and she said all that to him?
Wait, hold on. So there's no money left from this house?
Right, most of it went towards the condo.
I counted on the money from this house when I got divorced. What am I supposed to do now?
What? I couldn't hide my shock. What in the world happened?
I mean, what kind of cheap guy complains over a little debt?
Debt?
Yeah, I'm better off without him.
Michelle's words filled me with disgust. I'd heard she was irresponsible with money, but I couldn't believe she'd abandoned her family over it.
He took my cards and checkbook, and there's no use for a man like that.
A chill ran down my spine. To Michelle, everything seemed to boil down to money. And the debt probably wasn't a little either. Then Michelle suddenly had an idea.
Hey, since there's no other choice, let me live in that condo with you. I can take John's place, and it should be fine, right?
Michelle looked pleased, as if she'd come up with a brilliant plan. If she didn't understand what she was saying, I should explain it to her, step by step. You said I was just the maid for the family, right?
What?
I just wanted to confirm.
What about it?
I began to speak slowly. The condo is in Susan's name, so if she agrees, I can't say anything. But you're saying you want to live in a house that's no longer your family home?
What?
You also said to hand over all the money. Can you say that again? Michelle's face froze.
What? I never said that. You must have misheard.
I kept smiling as I answered. I think family is about supporting each other. It's wrong if someone has to endure to make it work. There's no way I'm spending the rest of my life enduring you, and there's no way I'm letting you use our money either. Michelle seemed so furious that she was at a loss for words. She ran into Susan's room, seeking help.
Mom, this woman is crazy.
Susan smacked Michelle's hand away as she tried to cling to her.
My legs might be bad, but my hearing's sharper than most. I heard everything. You've been awfully rude to Amy, haven't you?
What?
How can you say those things just because she's a woman married into the family? I can't believe it. Let me be clear. You've always been selfish, reckless with money, and impossible to deal with.
What, Mom? Isn't that a bit too much?
I was relieved when I thought you'd finally married a good man, but then you got divorced and came back. I'm really disappointed.
Disappointed? What are you talking about, Mom? Don't you want your daughter to be happy?
Susan let out a big sigh and said sharply,
Don't be so greedy.
What?
You think it's normal because you've always had him, but there's no one else like that man. No one else would put up with someone as clueless as you.
What? Mom, you've been going too far.
Get back to your husband, apologize, and ask to come home. That's the best thing for you.
My happiness?
That's right. You'll never find someone as good as him again. You'll regret it if you let him go.
Regret?
Susan knows Michelle's personality all too well and chose her words accordingly.
You can't compare a poor home with just an old lady and son's wife to that. If you get it, hurry up and go home.
That's Susan's words for her. For some reason, they carry a convincing force that makes you believe them. I'll give her one more push. Michelle, I think the sooner you apologize, the better.
Really?
I nodded deeply. Yes. Susan also spoke firmly.
Of course.
We should get her to leave before she changes her mind. Susan and I exchanged glances and nodded quietly.
Now, hurry up. If it's your husband, he'll understand if you explain things properly.
Don't worry, Michelle. I'll make sure to send your things back to you.
But, do you think he'll forgive me?
Michelle seemed hesitant. Susan's face turned stern.
No buts.
Susan pulled out a piece of paper.
Write down your sincerity on this paper. Say you'll stop wasting money, you'll change your ways, and you'll never come back here again.
Why?
For your own good. I'll show this to your husband and explain things properly for you. But in return, you must make up with him, and you must never come back to us again.
All right. Thank you, Mom.
Susan was a little scary. Using both the carrot and the stick to control the situation, and even securing evidence. Now, Michelle wouldn't be able to rely on us anymore. By the way, I've heard Susan never loses in her online gaming matches. Michelle obediently left. Susan looked exasperated.
Even though we're family, there's no way I could take care of that girl now, nor do I want to. For a daughter, you're more than enough for me. I'll be counting on you from now on.
Susan gave me a shy smile. Of course, Susan. Let's spend our time together peacefully. Afterward, Michelle went back home right away and apologized to her husband, asking to reconcile.
I was blinded by John's inheritance and got divorced. How foolish of me. Please forgive me.
It was good that Michelle honestly apologized, but while she was away from home, other debts, as well as her affair, had come to light, and even her kind husband wouldn't forgive her. Then, for some reason, Michelle started blaming me.
Amy manipulated me. I was brainwashed.
There was absolutely no reason for me to manipulate Michelle. And how would I even go about brainwashing someone? Her husband was deeply disappointed in Michelle for her dishonesty and lies. Susan was supposed to help smooth things over, but given her inability to lie, she ended up revealing everything, including things that didn't need to be said. It seems there would be no reconciliation until Michelle paid off her debts on her own and changed her ways.
What? I'm humbling myself and apologizing here.
With that attitude, it'll never happen, no matter how long she waits. Susan and I successfully moved, and we're enjoying a comfortable life. The room that was supposed to be John's study has now been set up as a personal gym where we can get some exercise. It's nothing fancy, but it's nice to have something I can use every day at home. Games are fun, but you need to exercise too, or your body will get lazy, Susan.
What are you talking about? There are online games where you move your body to play now.
Really? You're well informed as always.
You have to use both your mind and body in balance.
Am I the only one who feels like Susan is getting younger? She'll probably live a long life, and I can't afford to fall behind. I also think about the time when she will be gone. When that happens, this condo will belong to Michelle. I bet she's counting down the days until then. Susan even said she would make me her adopted daughter so I could inherit, but I don't want to have an inheritance battle with Michelle. If that day comes, I'll use John's inheritance and our savings to move into a retirement home. Although, judging by how Susan is doing, I don't think that day is coming anytime soon. Ironically, John's sudden passing made me reconsider my future life. What I should value from now on is the inheritance my husband left, my savings, and most importantly, my healthy body that allows me to keep working. Relying on someone else's money, like Michelle, is a scary way to live. If both my mind and body are healthy, most things will work out fine. I'll take responsibility for myself as I inevitably grow older. As I made this vow, Susan worked up a good sweat next to me while doing her exercises. Susan, I'll join you. Sorry to John, who might be waiting in heaven, but we plan to stick around for a long time yet.